Thank you, sir. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of you who are joining us online. There are more of you online than there are here, but we have more here, I believe, in attendance today than we've had in a few weeks. So maybe things are beginning to revert back to what we used to call normal, whatever the new normal is going to be. And it'll be good, whatever it is. Well, we are in the 13th chapter of Revelation, and we spent a fair amount of time last week kind of laying the groundwork. We talked about things in the 13th chapter before we actually got into reading the text. We did hear the text read, so you might, if you missed last week, it might be worth your time to go back and catch that either on YouTube or on our church website. And we'll get into the text of the 13th chapter today. We pointed out last week, and you need, of course, to have this context. We have the main characters that we'll be looking at here in the 13th chapter. We have the dragon, we have the beast from the sea, and we have the beast from the land. And we've laid a little bit of groundwork, as I said, last week in looking at these. Kind of what we talked about last week is that the dragon undoubtedly represents Satan. I think that don't know of anybody that takes any issue with that interpretation. When you get into the beast from the sea and the beast from the land, then it gets to be a little bit foggier, a little less unanimous opinion on that. I think that for the immediate context of John and his audience, there's very little doubt that the beast from the sea would have been the Roman Empire as it was at that time. And then we get into some area of less agreement as to what the beast from the land is, and there are any number of different ideas about that. We kind of held out the idea that the beast of the land represented spiritual Rome, that is the Roman Catholic Church that kind of grew out of the early Christian movement under the Roman Empire and became very intricately interwoven with the Roman Empire. There are different things, and I wouldn't even begin to go into all of them because there are too many of them, but there are a number of different opinions, and we'll mention 2 or 3 of them before we get through this morning. How does it apply to us today? Is there an application of the book of Revelation for the last 2,000 years following that era in which John prophesied? I think that there is. And we have maintained that there is. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot of reason for us to really be concerned about trying to interpret it. But I think that there is cause for us to know what it says to us, even though it was not written specifically to us, like so much of the Bible. It's written to an immediate audience, but there's also a secondary audience that has application. And I think that kind of where I am right now is that the beast would represent any nation that what I'm saying becomes Babylon. I'm using Babylon simply because that's the language of Revelation. We'll get into Babylon more in a few chapters down the way. But any nation that opposes Christ and his kingdom is Babylon. And I've made the statement, and will again, and I wish I had originated it, I didn't, but given enough time, every human nation will become Babylon. It's just in the nature of human power and the power structure to do that. And I have proposed that the second beast is any worship system used to trap people, to come between them and relationship with Jesus. And I think that we can look at the history of the Middle Ages and even the period of the Renaissance, and in some places even today, and we can see religious organizations which are not part of the solution, they're part of the problem insofar as our individual relationship with Jesus is concerned. There is the ecclesia, which is the God-ordained, Jesus-purchasing organization for which there is no criticism or condemnation. But that ecclesia gets wrapped up in human organizations, and we call them by a myriad of different names. And those organizations can come between the ecclesia and the mission of Jesus. So, into the text. And then I saw a beast come up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. Each of the 10 horns was wearing a coronet, a crown, and blasphemous names were written on the heads. The beast I saw was like a leopard with bear's feet and lion's mouth, and the dragon gave the monster his power and his throne and great authority. So the dragon, we said, is Satan, and anybody I know would agree that that is a proper interpretation. And he is now giving power to this beast coming out of the sea, out of the ocean. It becomes his representative, his source of authority, his source of power. The sea that it comes out of, I think, symbolizes human societies or nations with their stormy upheavals from which arise world powers. And this happens in every generation. For example, Hitler is a product of Nazism that arose from the restless sea of German society in the early 1970s. And we could make that same kind of an analysis and comparison with any number of despots, any number of men who have risen up to inflict great pain and suffering upon the world. We'll see that further explained in Revelation 17 when we get there. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So it's reasonable to assume that the sea here in Revelation 13 represents these human countries, societies, nations, influences from which this first beast comes into existence. Laying a little bit of groundwork from the Hebrew Scripture, Psalm 65 and 7, you stilled the roaring of the seas, the pounding of their waves, and the tumult of the nations. Seas with tumultuous nations. Isaiah 17 and 12, woe to the many nations that rage. They rage like the raging sea. Woe to the peoples who roar. They roar like the roaring of great waters. And in Isaiah 57 and 20, but the wicked are like the storm-tossed sea, for it cannot be stilled, and its waves churn up mire and muck. So I think it's a standard figure of speech. It's a standard metaphor, if you will, for the sea to be representative of these nations that are warring against God. One of the heads appeared to have been slaughtered and killed, but his fatal wound had been healed. The whole earth was awed and astonished by the beast and worshiped the dragon because it had given the beast its authority. So the world may have thought that they were worshiping the beast, but they were in effect worshiping the dragon because the beast had its being and its authority and its existence based on the power of the dragon. We always have to go back to Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, it seems, because these are also intricately linked together. Daniel 7:11, verses 11 through 12. I continued to watch because I could hear the little horn's boastful speech. I kept watching until the fourth beast was killed and his body was destroyed by fire. The other 3 beasts had their authority taken from them, but they were allowed to live a little while longer. They worshiped the beast too. Who is like the beast, they were saying. Who can fight against it? Isn't that a beautiful picture of the beast? I love that. You might want to make that your screensaver on your computer. I can email that to you. David Summers, we had a couple of his statements last week, and this is one of them, but I brought it back here because it fits into this particular context of the text. And he says that even Christians would wonder about the durability of the Roman Empire, since it seemed that God, Christ, and the angels working together could not kill it, despite the assurances of judgment in the first part of John's vision. In the first part of John's vision, back in chapters 1, we see this all-powerful Jesus, this vision of Jesus, and now we continue to see the Roman Empire raining down hellfire and brimstone on Christians. And it would cause the Christians to say, wow, are we going to get out of this or not? However, this would only be true if they did not understand the power behind the throne in the person of Satan, who is using these beasts from the sea and the beasts from the land, to make a two-pronged attack upon the ecclesia. So verses 5 and 6, and the beast was given a mouth that speaks great blasphemous words, and was given authority for 42 months. 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,280 days, time and half a time, they're all the same. It's all half of 7. 7 being the number of perfection, the number of God, and these being half of that. Not an infinite time, but a duration of time. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, to curse his name and his dwelling place, that is, those who dwell in heaven. So we have the sevenfold description here. The 7 heads, the 10 horns, the 10 diadem, speaking blasphemies, body of a leopard, feet of a bear, mouth of a lion, and similar in a lot of ways to Daniel 7, verses 1 through 7. But one more instance of where we have the repetition of 7. And just because you don't see the number 7 doesn't mean the number 7 is not there. The number 7 is all the way through it. I think I told you once that there was one of the commentators who counted up to 100 times and quit. So I don't know how many times you could make 7 out of the book of Revelation. It's just all the way through it. Daniel 7, verses 1 through 6, and I've excerpted, this is the Reader's Digest version. I've cut out some of the language. During the first year of King Belshazzar's reign, remember Belshazzar is the king that followed King Nebuchadnezzar. During his reign in Babylon, Daniel had a dream and saw visions as he lay in his bed. I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of the great sea with strong winds blowing from every direction. Then 4 huge beasts came up out of the water, each different from the other. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings. Then I saw a second beast, and it looked like a bear. And I heard a voice saying to it, "Get up, devour the flesh of many people." Then the third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. It was granted the right to make war against God's holy people and to defeat them. And it was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. Daniel 7, 7 through 9. Then I saw a 4th beast. I believe this is the beast that we just read about in Revelation 13 and 7, or the one that most closely correlates with it. I saw a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, and very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. And as I looked at the horns, suddenly another small horn appeared among them. 3 of the first horns were torn out by the roots to make room for it. This little horn had eyes like human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. I watched as thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days sat down to judgment. Very similar language. The apocryphal, the apocalyptic style of literature is not new to John. It's at least several hundred of years before his time that it became into use. King Nebuchadnezzar, somewhat similar to this in Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up in Babylon. Then he sent messengers to all the provincial officers to come to the dedication of the statue. When you hear the sound of any musical instrument, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And of course, that was the thing that got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace. Chapter 13, verse 7, it was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. Some of the scholars who try to figure out specifics about all of these different visions in Revelation, trying to give it some more literal application, say that, well, this cannot refer to the Roman Empire because Rome didn't rule over the whole world. It ruled over the Mediterranean world. Well, that's true, but in the language that they're using here, it's, I think, the same kind of concept as we have with Paul when he says that Christianity was preached to the whole world, that all creation had heard the word during his lifetime. He says that it's gone out to the ends of the earth. Well, we understand that as he's talking about his world, the Babylonian, the world of Rome. It didn't go to America. It didn't go to Australia. It did later, but not during Paul's lifetime. So we have the same sort of thing here, I think, when we look at this apocalyptic literature and see him talking about every tribe and people and language and nation. We understand that, and John's audience would have understood that to mean their world, the Mediterranean world. So that is not a basis for not understanding this to be applicable to the Roman Empire in the day of John. Verses 8 and 9. So everyone who lived on earth worshipped it, that is, the beast. Everyone, that is, whose name was not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life, belonging to the Lamb who was slaughtered. Salvation was planned before there was light. Before God said, let there be light, God already had a plan in place. The shadow of the cross fell across the manger. The conquered become the conquerors. If anyone has ears, let them hear. In verse 10, if anyone is to be taken captive, into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This is a summons for God's holy people to be patient and have faith. And I think this really summarizes what the book of Revelation is about. We say that the book of Revelation is, the thesis of the book of Revelation is that there's war and there's a war between God and Satan and God wins. That's true. But the message for you and me is a summons from God to his holy people to be patient and to not lose faith. These things are going to happen. They have happened. They are happening. They will happen. Your job, be faithful. Be patient. Jeremiah 15:2, if they ask you, where shall we go? You are to tell them that this is what the Lord says. Those destined for death, to death. Those destined for the sword, to the sword. Those destined for famine, to famine. And those destined for captivity, to captivity. Wherever you are, whatever your station in life, as Paul said, I've learned in all conditions to accept what it is that God has given me. Our job is to stand. And having done all, to stand. Then I saw another beast coming up from the earth. It had two horns like those of a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. Now we're getting to the second beast, the beast from the earth. There's a reference here to Daniel 8 and verse 3. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw a ram with two horns standing beside the canal. The horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one grew up later. This second beast is differentiated from the first beast in several ways. Of course, the first beast comes out of the sea, which is more universal. The second comes out of the land, which is a little more territorial. But the second beast gives the appearance of being a lamb, a ram, which to me infers several things. For number one, it doesn't appear nearly as ominous as the first one does. The first beast is, he's a pretty woolly booger. Not anybody you want to meet on a dark alley. The second beast's power lies, I think, much more strongly on deception. The first beast perhaps more associated with violence. The second beast, there's still the violence, but there's more of a deception involved. It seems to possess more supernatural power, much more subtle, intelligent, more cultured. Later it's going to be called a false prophet. It looks like a lamb, but its purpose is to serve the dragon. Its purpose is world dominion. What I'm trying to say here is that the idea of the appearance of the lamb lends itself more to a spiritual deception, where the first beast lends itself more to political, governmental authority and power. So it seems reasonable to me that the conclusions that we've made that in John's day, the second beast is some spiritual power. Some authorities would say it's the pagan Roman system as opposed to the political Roman system, the false gods. A lot of authorities believe that it's the Roman Catholic Church, as we've talked about in the past. But anyway, however you look at it, it seems to be of a more spiritual nature than is the first beast. It acts in the presence of the first beast and with its full authority, and it makes the earth and those who live on it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. Some of the other interpretations of who this second beast represents, of course, we talked about it being the hierarchy, the power structure of the Roman Catholic Church, and we made the point last week of saying we're not condemning everybody because they happen to be born into a Catholic family and worship in a Catholic environment. We make no judgments on their relationship between them and God. We're talking about a political power here. We're talking about a Roman Catholic organization that was sometimes above the civil government, sometimes above the king, sometimes intricately connected with the king, seldom subservient to it. And Greek Orthodox Church, when we were in Athens in Greece, I've been over there on 3 different occasions, and the Greek Orthodox Church, you're born into the Greek Orthodox Church. You go to the basilica when you're christened. You're 8 or 10 days old when they name you. You go to the basilica when you get married. They may carry you by the basilica when you die. And other than that, you don't really let the church interfere with your life very much. Some exceptions. There are a few people who are very devoutly Greek Orthodox, but most people are born Greek Orthodox, and then they go about their secular business without much interference with that. The Roman Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Church of England, all have the common feature of being very strongly a part of the political system. When the political power in Greece sits in public, at his right hand is the Papa, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church. And even though Greece is a very secular nation, the Papa still maintains a very high level of influence in the government. Church of England, of course, who's the head of the Church of England? Queen Elizabeth II. I don't know how much that is involved in the everyday affairs of the Church of England, but she's the head of the church. Whether it's just a title or she exercises a great deal of control, I don't know. But in all of these, we have the presence of the religious organization being very much intricate with and vying for power with the political organization. And it seems to me that this fits the description of the second beast, where you have a spiritual, whether it's pagan Rome or whether it's the Roman Catholic Church or the Church of England or the Greek Orthodox Church or the Coptic religion in Africa or whatever it is, when you have this marriage between and sometimes conflict of power between the political and the religious community, then you're dealing with the second beast. And I would go even further than that and say that any self-promoting church, any church that puts itself between an individual's relationship with God, becomes that second beast, the beast from the land. So that could be a very wide swath. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it. So, all right, verse 13. It performs great signs so that it even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of people. And it deceives the people who live on earth by the signs which it has been allowed to perform in front of the beast, instructing the earth's inhabitants to make an image of the beast who had the sword wound but was alive. I'm pretty sure that the Roman Catholic Church probably kept the Roman Empire viable longer than it might have been without them. And it continued to be a strange dance between the emperor and then eventually the king and the pope through the centuries. And in many countries, frankly, it still is today. Jesus had something to say about this in Matthew 24 and 24. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders that will deceive even the elect, if that were possible. 2 Thessalonians 2 and 9, the coming of the lawless one will be accompanied by the working of Satan with every kind of power, sign, and false wonder. It kind of occurred to me, and I may be out on a limb here, and you're welcome to take this with a grain of sand, grain of salt. But it seems to me that today the world and wonders of science are used to represent the purpose, at least, of the second beast, insofar as science is used to promote atheism and discount intelligent design, to discount the existence of a creative power. It seems like a disproportionate number of people who dedicate themselves to the fields of science are atheistic, which to me is just almost an oxymoron. It just doesn't make sense. We've talked some in the past about various areas of science, and I continue to be fascinated, and I've just finished another book on some of the conundrums that science is encountering. You know, in times past, at different times in the history of our country and in Europe, various scientists have felt like they have come to the end of knowledge. All scientific knowledge has now been discovered. Wow. And that was before relativity and far before quantum. But as I read more about and hear more about, study more about the world of quantum physics, and believe me, I'm not a scientist, I make no pretense, I'm just regurgitating things that I learn from others. Every time we learn something, we learn how much we don't know. Every step forward just opens up a huge maze of material that we have no clue about. And nowhere is that more apparent than in this developing science of quantum physics. And when I talk about quantum physics, if you haven't been involved in our other discussions, we're talking about the very small. We're talking about the atomic world. We're talking about the world of neutrons, protons, and electrons, and quarks, and strings, and things that go bump in the night. But the things that we are beginning to think that we know about that, and I say we, not me, the scientific world, are just so mind-boggling because the quantum world does not follow any of the rules of what our physical world seems to follow. The world of relativity and the world of quantum don't intertwine. We think of Einstein's rule of relativity as being involatile, and yet quantum law breaks all of them. And the only way that you can begin to reconcile the two is to discard time. Isn't that strange? If you throw out the element of time, then you can begin to reconcile the relative world and the quantum world. And it just seems to me that the more we learn about the quantum world, the world of the very small, the closer we get to the absolute inevitability of cause, God. Everything exists in the mind of God. And how that a scientist can know the things that scientists know and work with the things that scientists work with and deny causality, deny intelligent design, is just mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. Anyway, I digress. No one's that ever stopped me before. So we come back to our slide that we started with, where I'm kind of making the point that, in my opinion, at this time, always subject to change, the immediate application for John's audience, I think we almost have to understand that the first beast for John's world was the empire of Rome. I think that's just very apparent. Was he thinking of, or was he predicting the rise of the Roman Catholic Church that grew out of that governmental system? It fits. It may not be the right answer, but it fits. Was he talking about secular pagan, talking about religious pagan Rome of the time? Maybe. Was he, whatever it was something that disguised itself in a way that he describes as a lamb, which is the vision of Jesus, and yet it was by no means a friend of God. And what does it mean today? Again, I think that any nation, and we could go by and quantify these and name any number of nations that very obviously have become Babylon, and others that are well on their way to doing so. Just as some counter arguments, N.T. Wright, one of my favorite theologians, sees the first beast as the Roman Empire and the second beast as the local Roman governments that support and protect the beast. I have a little bit of issue with that because I don't see the spiritual element in it. I don't see the lamb in it. Homer Haley, you all know who Homer Haley is, right? Homer Haley was a Church of Christ commentator. He was a professor at Abilene Christian, wrote commentaries on a large number of books. I think he died in 2000. Homer Haley sees the second beast as being all the false religions since the fall of the Roman pagan system. And I can kind of go along with that. I see that as being consistent with what we're talking about. He concludes that, this is Homer Haley, he concludes that the number of the beast, 666, stands for the complete and total failure of all human systems and efforts antagonistic to God and His church. And I think that there's a lot of merit in that as well. Well, we're coming to the 16th verse of chapter 13, and now we're going to deal with the mark of the beast, 666. I know you all have been impatient for me to get here. We are here. Hallelujah. I read this. I wish I'd have thought of it, but I think it's really good. In apocalyptic literature, numbers are not counted, they're weighed. We've said that in a lot of different ways, but that's a good way to say it. Numbers are not counted, but they're weighed. They have strength. They have purpose, but it's not a counting. Okay, so the beast, it makes everybody, small and great, rich and poor, free and slaves, receive a sign from the beast, marked on their right hands and on their foreheads, so that nobody can buy or sell unless they have the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. The mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. And the number is 666. This is the anti-Shema. You know what the Shema is. Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 8. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. The mark of the beast is the anti-Shema. The Jews were to tie the Shema on their hands and wear them on their forehead as reminders. They're called phylacteries. You can see the box that's on the bicep and on the forehead. Bicep, and it's held on by the string that's held by the hand. This is the mark of the Orthodox Jew, and they use it today. If you go to Israel especially, or anywhere there's an Orthodox Jewish community, you will still see rabbis and Orthodox Jews wearing these marks, the mark of the phylacteries, the box on their head and on their arm. These have scripture in them. They're writing God's word on their head and on their hand. Revelation 7:3, God seals his people on their forehead. Galatians 6 and 17, a little different application, but Paul says, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Because he's talking about scars. But this marking is not anything new. It has strong roots in Jewish literature. Some of the things that have been called the mark of the beast, and this is just a few. There are many, many more. When credit cards came out, some were declaring that to be the mark of the beast. Barcodes. You know, we have a hard time keeping attendance at services here. And I had suggested to the elders at one point that when somebody places membership here, we just tattoo a barcode on their forehead, and when you walk in, we'd have a scanner, right? And we would know if you were here or not. Perfectly logical to me. I don't know why they didn't buy into it. Microchips, boy, that was a big one. The microchip, like we put in our animals, to identify them. Everybody's going to have a microchip. And if you don't have a microchip, you can't go buy anything from the store. That's the mark of the beast. ATM machines were considered a mark of the beast. Now the vaccines, the vaccines are going to implant something into your system that will allow it. There's one more that I didn't put up there, but it kind of occurred to me, so.
I can read it too.
Well, you can't go in the store and buy anything if you don't have it on.
That's right.
Isn't that the sign of the mark of the beast?
Yes.
There you go. Well, the mark of the beast has been a very big issue for a lot of people and created an awful lot of literature for sure. And a lot of people are very frightened of it. If you have a credit card and it's got 3 6s in the number, are you going to call the company and say, I need a new card? I don't want that card.
Officer.
Yes, sir. Talk a little bit about Gematria, or Gematria. I've heard it pronounced both ways, Gematria. Oh my goodness, we're out of time. Oh my, I'm sorry. We're going to have to come back to this next week because this is really fascinating stuff, and I don't want to rush through it. We're going to unpack the mark of the beast next week. You will have no doubt in your mind whatsoever what the mark of the beast is by the time we get through next week. As long as you don't read anybody else or listen to anybody else, because that will confuse you. As long as you just accept what I tell you, we'll all be on the same page and we'll all understand it alike. That'll do it. Fascinating stuff, though. It's one of the, if you mention the book of Revelation to most people who are not Bible scholars, one of the first things that they're going to think about is 666, mark of the beast. Oh my goodness. Well, let's see if we can unpack that a little bit and give it a little bit of context, Lord willing, next Sunday. So, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for all of you who are online today. We appreciate you joining us. And
We could all stand up and
wave to everybody online. And we wish you all a very God blessed week.